The alien palace was eerily silent, its once glorious halls now echoing with the sounds of destruction. What was left of the royal estate was crumbling under the weight of war. The walls, once bright with paintings of heroic ancestors, were now pocked with bullet holes. Dust filled the air, and the faint glow of alien lights flickered weakly in the corners. Outside, the sky was dark with smoke, a reminder of the ongoing invasion. In the midst of this chaos, deep within the palace's inner chambers, the alien princess sat in a dark corner, cradling her newborn child. The baby's soft cries broke the silence, the sound reverberating off the cold stone walls. It was the only sound in an otherwise quiet room. The baby's face, still swollen from birth, twisted in distress, its tiny hands flailing helplessly in the air. The princess's heart raced. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if the sound would betray her. She had to keep her baby quiet, keep them hidden. Her people, her entire lineage was at risk. If the invaders found them, it would be over. The baby, the future heir to the throne, would be lost. Please, she whispered, cradling the infant tighter in her arms. She rocked back and forth, but the cries only grew louder. The princess bit her lip, her mind racing. It wasn't just the baby that was in danger. Her own life had no meaning if she couldn't protect her child. Invaders would surely show no mercy. Suddenly, a noise from outside the room made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, echoed down the hallway. The princess's pulse quickened. She moved swiftly, crouching in the shadows, pressed her baby close to her chest, hoping its cries would stop, but it didn't. The baby let out another loud wail, and the princess winced. She couldn't silence it. She looked around desperately. There had to be something, anything, to make the child stop. Then the footsteps stopped. They were too close now. A shadow fell across the doorway, and a figure stood in the dim light. The princess's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't see much of the person's face, but their presence was undeniable. The invaders had found her. But to her surprise, it wasn't the enemy that stood before her. The figure took a cautious step forward, and the princess's eyes widened. It was a human soldier, an earthborn warrior. She had heard stories of these Deathworlders, as her people called them. Her empire's diplomats had warned that humans were aggressive, savage creatures built for destruction. She had always assumed the worst about them. The soldier's face was covered in the dirt and grime of battle. His uniform torn in places, but he wasn't wearing the armor of the invaders. His eyes, despite the exhaustion and tension in his expression, seemed calm. There was no malice in them. He wasn't here to kill her. It's okay, the soldier whispered, lowering his rifle and slowly approaching. The princess's breath caught in her throat. She backed away, cradling the baby tighter to her chest. "No," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Stay away from me." The soldier paused, clearly taken aback by her reaction, but then his eyes softened. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, showing that he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady. "I just heard the baby cry." The princess narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "You human," she said, her voice full of disbelief. She'd been raised to fear humans, to think of them as nothing but barbaric killers who destroyed anything in their path. "I'm not like the others," the soldier replied. "I'm alone, lost, actually. My unit got separated, and I've been trying to find them. I heard the cry, and I thought I could help." He took another step forward, more cautiously this time, his eyes locked on the baby. The princess's grip tightened on her child, but something about the soldier's tone made her pause. His voice wasn't filled with the cruelty she had expected. It was filled with concern, even compassion. "Please," he said, "I don't want to fight. I just want to help, let me." The princess felt a strange mix of emotions. She was terrified that he might turn on her, or that his mere presence might lead the invaders to her hiding spot. But there was something else too, something in his voice, in the way he spoke to her. For the first time she saw a human, not as a monster, but as someone who might understand what it meant to protect a life. She didn't answer right away. Her instincts told her to run, to escape. But the baby's cries were growing louder. It was too late to hide. The enemy would hear. The soldier was right. She needed help. She needed someone who wasn't trying to take everything from her. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she spoke. You... Can you make him stop crying? Her voice cracked as she spoke, a mixture of desperation and disbelief. The soldier nodded. Slowly, he reached out a hand, careful not to startle her. The princess's hand trembled as she finally allowed him to approach. She didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't stop herself. Her baby's cries were too much. To bear with gentle hands, the soldier took the baby from her arms. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he had done this many times before. The princess watched, her heart racing, as the soldier carefully cradled the child in his arms. The baby's cries grew quieter as he whispered soft words that the princess couldn't understand but seemed to calm the child nonetheless. The soldier looked at the princess, his eyes steady, and spoke again. "It's all right," he said. "He's just scared. Like you. But I'll keep him safe, I promise." For the first time since the invasion began, the princess felt a glimmer of hope. The baby stopped crying, its tiny hands stilling as it looked up at the soldier, almost as though it recognized the kindness in his eyes. The soldier smiled faintly, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of their breathing and the distant noise of war outside. It was a brief moment of peace in the chaos, a moment that felt as fragile as the child in his arms. The princess swallowed, her thoughts racing. She had been taught to fear humans, to see them as enemies to her people, as agents of destruction. But now, standing in front of her, was someone who seemed to be the complete opposite. He was offering help, not harm. "I don't understand," she said, her voice still shaky. "You're human." The soldier didn't immediately answer. Instead, he shifted his grip on the baby and finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "Because ... I know what it's like to lose someone. I wouldn't want anyone to go through that. Not you, not him." The princess blinked, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know what to say. The soldier's words struck her deeply, and for the first time, she felt a connection, not to an enemy or a warlord, but to a simple human being who was willing to risk everything for someone he didn't know. In that moment, everything changed. The princess couldn't tear her eyes away from the soldier. There he stood, holding her baby with the same care one might give to something precious, something fragile. The soft glow from the broken lights of the palace flickered in his eyes. As he glanced down at the child, a quiet warmth in his expression. The princess had never seen anyone, let alone a human, look at a baby with such tenderness. The idea that someone so foreign to her, someone from a world far away, could care for her child as she did was a thought she couldn't quite process. The baby had finally stopped crying. Its tiny body, once racked with sobs, now rested peacefully in the soldier's arms. A peaceful silence hung between them, broken only by the occasional distant rumble of artillery in the distance. The war, the chaos outside, seemed so far away in that moment. Here, in the corner of this ruined palace, was just the three of them: a royal alien princess, a human soldier, and a newborn child. For the first time in what felt like forever, the princess felt a small spark of hope. The soldier shifted his weight and gently handed the baby back to her. As she took her child in her arms, the princess couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She wasn't sure how to express it. How could she thank someone she had been taught to fear, to see as a threat? Her people's stories about humans had always been filled with warnings about their savagery, their brutal nature. But here was evidence to the contrary: a human who was kind, who protected, who had saved her baby when no one else could. Her mind was racing. She had to think. She had to plan. If the enemy was nearby, they couldn't stay here much longer. But the soldier's presence made her hesitate. For the first time, she was unsure of what her next step should be. Should she try to escape again? Should she leave the soldier behind and risk everything for herself and her child? The soldier seemed to sense her turmoil. He lowered his voice, keeping his distance, but his words were gentle. "We can't stay here long. They'll find us." "But I know a place, not far from here. It's hidden. You and the baby can be safe." There, the princess looked at him, studying him. The war had torn her world apart, and she had no choice but to trust him. For a moment, she felt a twinge of guilt. She was the heir to a powerful empire, one that had ruled for centuries. She should have been the one offering protection, not seeking it from someone who was supposed to be her enemy. But there was no time for pride. There was no time for hesitation. "Lead the way," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. She took a deep breath, adjusted her baby against her chest, followed the soldier. The soldier nodded, and without another word, he motioned for her to follow him. He led her through the darkened corridors of the palace, his movements precise and deliberate. The sound of the baby's breathing was the only noise that filled the air, a soft reminder of the life that hung in the balance. They moved quickly, avoiding the places where the enemy might be searching. The soldier knew the layout of the palace better than the princess expected. His steps were quiet, careful, as if he had spent time learning every inch of the structure. She had heard that humans were quick to adapt, to learn their surroundings. But she hadn't realized just how skilled they were in a world so different from their own. As they rounded a corner, the soldier stopped and held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. He peeked around the corner, his eyes scanning the hall. The princess could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat a reminder that their time was running out. She held her breath, waiting for the soldier to give the signal. After a moment, he gave a slight nod. "We're clear," he whispered. "This way." They continued down the hallway, moving as silently as possible. The princess's mind raced. What was she supposed to do now? Who could she trust? The war had thrown everything into chaos, and she was no longer sure who her allies were. Her people had always been proud, strong, but now they were scattered, broken, trying to survive. The princess herself had barely escaped with her life and her child before the palace fell. She had no army left, no kingdom to return to. She had nothing except a human soldier, a stranger in a foreign land, and the hope that he would keep his promise to protect them. Eventually, they reached a small door at the end of a narrow corridor. The soldier pulled a device from his pocket and scanned it over the door, a soft beep signaling that the lock had disengaged. He pushed the door open, revealing a small room beyond. It was simple, but safe. A few crates and supplies were stacked against the walls, and a small cot sat in the corner. "This is where we'll hide," the soldier said, turning to face her. "We'll stay here until it's safe to move again." The princess stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. It was nothing like the royal chambers she had grown up in, but it would do. It was secure, at least for now. She nodded and sat down on the cot, gently placing her baby beside her. The child was still asleep, exhausted from the long ordeal. The princess's heart ached as she looked at the tiny face. How much longer could they run? How many more people would fall before this war was over? "I'll stand guard," the soldier said, as if reading her thoughts. "Get some rest. You and your baby need it." The princess nodded gratefully, but she didn't lie down. She watched him for a moment, studying his face. He seemed so different from the image of humans she had been taught to fear. He wasn't the enemy. He wasn't here to destroy. He was here to help, to protect. But how long could she trust him? The war had taught her that trust was a rare commodity, and even the smallest mistake could cost everything. Her people had lost their kingdom, their honor, their pride. Could she risk trusting someone like him? The soldier, seemingly unaware of her thoughts, moved to the door and settled against the wall, his eyes scanning the corridor outside. He didn't seem worried. He didn't seem afraid. He was a warrior, a protector, and right now the princess realized he was her only hope. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes. She wasn't sure how long they would be safe here, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The fear, the worry, it was still, there gnawing at the back of her mind. But for now, she had the soldier, and with him, maybe there was a chance. Maybe, just maybe, things would change. Maybe there was hope for her people after all. As the hours passed, the room grew quieter. The soldier's presence was a silent comfort, and the princess's mind finally began to calm. But in the back of her thoughts, the questions remained. What would happen when the enemy came for them? How long could they hide? And what did the future hold for her child? Would her baby be safe? Would the soldier be able to keep his promise? But for now, she had no answers. She only had the present, and the strange, quiet hope that had begun to grow within her. The hours passed slowly in the small room, and the princess sat on the cot, her eyes occasionally drifting to the soldier as he kept watch by the door. The baby was still asleep, its small chest rising and falling with each breath. But the princess knew that peace like this would never last. The war outside was still raging, and no place could remain hidden forever. The soldier had said they would stay here until it was safe to move again. But how long could they stay? How much longer would they be safe in this small, hidden room? While the invaders closed in on every side, she knew that the longer they stayed, the more likely it was they would be found. The enemy would come searching for her. They would never stop until they had her, till they had the child. She shifted uncomfortably on the cot, her mind racing with plans and thoughts she couldn't bring herself to voice. Every choice seemed like a dangerous one. Her people were scattered. Their army had been shattered, their cities burned. The princess had nothing left but this human soldier and the fragile hope that he might protect her child. The soldier, as if sensing her tension, turned from the door and glanced at her. Eyes were calm, as if the dangers outside didn't faze him. But she saw the exhaustion in his face. He had been through battles, fought for his life and the lives of others. And now here he was, in a foreign land, protecting someone he had just met. It seemed impossible, but there he was. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the baby, and lowered his voice. "Hey, we can't stay here forever. The longer we wait, the more likely they'll find us. We need to keep moving." The princess nodded. Slowly, she had already known that. But where could they go? The palace was destroyed. The city was in ruins. The enemy had already cut off every escape route she knew. The thought of running again, leaving everything behind once more, was too much to bear. She couldn't keep fleeing forever. "We have no choice," the soldier continued. "I know a place, a stronghold of sorts, deep in the mountains. It's been abandoned for years, but I think it might be safe." The princess looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "The mountains?" she asked softly. "That's where the invaders are strongest. They'll hunt us there." The soldier didn't flinch at her words. He was used to danger, used to the unpredictability of war. "Yes, the mountains are dangerous. But that's why they won't expect us to go there. It's remote. It's hidden. We can make it." The princess hesitated, her mind torn between fear and necessity. It was true that staying here was not an option, but the thought of trekking through enemy territory again made her stomach tighten. She had already been forced to run too many times, and she wasn't sure she could face another journey like the one that had brought her here. She looked down at her child, still peacefully sleeping in her arms. The baby's tiny face was so innocent, so unaware of the danger that surrounded them. It was all for this child now. She couldn't let fear control her decisions. She had to be strong, for her baby, for her people. "All right," the princess said, her voice steady. "We'll go to the mountains, but we must move quickly. The enemy won't give up easily." The soldier nodded, his eyes gleaming with a quiet determination. He was ready. The fear that had been so palpable in her own chest seemed to have no place in his. He was a soldier, warrior, and he knew how to survive. Maybe, just maybe, with him, they could make it. The princess stood and adjusted the baby against her chest, checking to make sure it was still sleeping. "How long will it take to get there?" she asked, hoping he had some idea of how long. They would be on the move. "We'll make it in 2 days if we travel light and keep off the main paths," the soldier said. He didn't seem concerned by the difficulty of the journey. "The mountains are rough terrain, but it's the only way we can stay ahead of the enemy." 2 days. The thought of 2 days of traveling, without rest, without any real safety, made the princess's heart sink. But there was no other option. It had to be done. "We'll need supplies," she said, looking around the small room for anything that could be useful. The room was bare, nothing more than a storage area. There were crates, but none of them seemed to have anything of value. Do you have any? The soldier shook his head. I've got a few rations left, but that's it. We'll need to find more along the way. There are some abandoned supply caches in the area. We'll have to be careful, though. The enemy might have already raided them. The princess didn't say anything. She knew that supplies would be scarce, especially in enemy-held territory. But again, she had no choice. They had to take the risk. They gathered what little they had and prepared to leave. The soldier checked his weapon, making sure it was ready. The princess looked down at the baby, unsure how to move forward. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay, that they would make it to the mountains safely. But she couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. Once they were ready, the soldier led the way. He moved with confidence, his eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of the enemy. The princess followed closely behind, clutching her child tightly, her every sense alert. They moved swiftly, as if they had done this 100 times before. The soldier's movements were calculated, precise, and the princess couldn't help but feel a small measure of relief in his presence. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a protector, someone who would do everything in his power to keep them safe. As they moved through the darkened halls, Princess found herself growing more accustomed to the soldier's presence. She had once thought of humans as violent, unpredictable creatures, but now she saw something different in him. He wasn't just a soldier of war, he was a man with his own pain, his own losses. She could see it in his eyes, the weight of the battles he had fought, the people he had lost. She glanced at him as they walked, wondering what had brought him here. To this strange planet, to this strange war. Why had he chosen to help her? Was it because of his duty, or was there something else? The soldier caught her glance and met her eyes. He didn't say anything at first, but then he spoke, his voice low. I lost my sister, he said simply. She died because of this war. I'm here because I don't want anyone else to lose someone, not if I can help it. The princess was silent, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know what to say. She didn't have the words to comfort him. Bucket? She'll say to someone who had lost so much. I'm sorry, she finally whispered. The soldier nodded, though the sadness in his eyes didn't fade. It's not your fault, he said, but that's why I'm here. I protect people. I protect those who can't protect themselves. Your baby, he's the future. I'll make sure he has one. The princess didn't know how to respond to that. She had always been taught that her people were the ones who protected the galaxy, that it was their duty to rule, to control, to keep order. But this human soldier, someone from a distant world, had shown her something different, the power of simple protection, of doing what was right. No matter the cost, they moved through the palace in silence after that, each step taking them closer to the unknown, closer to the mountains, closer to safety, or at least the hope of it. When they finally reached the edge of the palace grounds, the princess could see the mountains looming in the distance, dark and foreboding against the fading light of the day. The journey ahead was long, and she had no way of knowing what dangers awaited them. But with the soldier at her side, she felt a strange sense of calm, as if for the first time in days she wasn't alone. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could make it through this. Perhaps they could survive. The journey toward the mountains was harder than the princess had anticipated. The terrain was rugged, and the path was nearly invisible, obscured by overgrown vegetation and the remnants of past battles. They had moved through the city in the early hours of the morning, staying close to the shadows, careful not to alert the enemy. The soldier's sharp eyes were always scanning their surroundings, making sure no one was watching. The princess followed quietly, her thoughts a jumble of worry and determination. Every step felt like it might be their last. Her baby, wrapped tightly in her arms, slept soundly through it all, oblivious to the danger surrounding them. The princess had to remind herself that they were doing this for him, for his future, for the hope that one day he would have a world to live in, a world without fear. But even the thought of a future seemed distant and uncertain. The soldier led the way, his movements fluid and confident, as though he had traveled these paths before, seemed to know exactly where to go, which route to take, and which ones. to avoid. It was clear he was used to danger, used to being in hostile territories. She could see it in the way he carried himself, and the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon. But he was also careful, always thinking ahead, always making sure they stayed one step ahead of the enemy. They didn't speak much as they traveled. The soldier was focused on keeping them safe, while the princess had her mind on other things. She couldn't help but wonder if there was still any hope for her people. The world had been torn apart, her kingdom shattered. The invaders had come so quickly, so violently, that there had been no time to prepare, no time to fight back. Now she was reduced to hiding in the shadows. Relying on a human soldier for protection, she had been taught to fear humans, to see them as ruthless conquerors who destroyed everything in their path. But in the soldier's presence, she saw a different side of them. He was willing to risk his life to help her, to protect her baby. He wasn't a monster. He was a man-a-soldier, yes, but also someone who cared about others, someone who had lost his own and didn't want to see others suffer the same fate. The princess's mind wandered to the stories she had heard about human stories of their wars, their bloodshed, their destruction. Her people had always feared the day humans would turn their attention toward them, and now that day had come. But she couldn't help but wonder if her people had misunderstood them. Were all humans truly so dangerous? Or was it just their way of surviving in a harsh, unforgiving world? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to dwell on such things. Not now. Not when her baby needed her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the mountains ahead. The air had grown colder as they neared the foothills, the wind carrying a chill that made the princess shiver. The soldier had pulled out a weathered map from his bag and was studying it closely. His brow furrowed in concentration. "We're getting close," he said quietly, his voice steady. "The hideout is just beyond that ridge. We should be able to rest there for the night." The princess nodded, relieved to hear they were almost there. The exhaustion in her bones was starting to take its toll. She hadn't had a real rest in days, and her body was beginning to protest. But the thought of being somewhere safe, even if only for a short time, kept her going. As they climbed higher, the terrain grew more difficult. The rocks were loose, and the path grew steeper, forcing them to take small, careful steps. The princess's legs ached, and her arms were sore from carrying the baby, but she pushed through. She couldn't afford to slow down now. Not when they were so close. The soldier glanced back at her, his face set in a mask of determination. "We're almost there," he said. "Just a little farther." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I can make it." And she did. Despite the pain, despite the weight of everything pressing down on her, she kept going. One foot in front of the other. She had to. For her baby, the ridge loomed closer, and the air grew thinner, colder. The princess could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the mountain winds tugging at her hair. It's the quiet, still feeling of the highlands settling over them. It was almost as if the mountains themselves were watching them, silent sentinels keeping guard over their path. Finally, they reached the top of the ridge. The soldier led the way down the other side, toward a small, concealed cave nestled against the rock. It was hidden well, surrounded by jagged boulders and thick underbrush. The princess felt a wave of relief wash over her as they entered the cave. It was small, but it was dry and protected from the wind. She set her baby down on a flat rock in the corner, carefully wrapping him in a blanket. Her hands trembled slightly from the strain of carrying him, but she did her best to keep calm. She wasn't sure how long they would stay here, but for the moment, it was the safest place they could be. The soldier gathered some wood from the surrounding area and quickly set up a small fire in the center of the cave. The warmth from the flames was a welcome relief, and the princess couldn't help but lean toward it, feeling the heat seep into her cold bones. "Thank you," she said softly, watching the soldier work. "For everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." The soldier glanced up, his eyes softening slightly. "It's nothing. I'm just doing my job." But the princess could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just doing his job, he was doing something more. He was helping because he believed it was the right thing to do. For the first time, Princess began to understand why he was so different from the other humans she had heard about. She sat down beside her baby, her gaze never leaving him. Her thoughts were a blur, her emotions a whirlwind. But beneath it all, there was a quiet sense of gratitude for this soldier, this human who had risked everything to help her, to protect her child. She had feared humans her entire life, but now she wasn't so sure. Was this soldier an exception? Or was there more to humans than she had been led to believe? "Do you ever think about home?" she asked, breaking the silence. The soldier's expression softened, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I think about Earth a lot. It's not the same there anymore either. It's been a long time since I've been home, but I keep fighting because I believe we can make a difference." The princess nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had once believed that her people were the only ones who mattered, the only ones worthy of protection. But now, as she listened to the soldier speak, she realized that perhaps there was more to the universe than just her people. Perhaps all beings, no matter their origin, shared a common desire to survive, to protect those they loved, and to create a better future. The fire crackled softly between them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the princess allowed herself to relax. She let her guard down just for a moment and leaned back against the cave wall. The baby, still sleeping peacefully, let out a soft sigh, and the princess closed her eyes, thankful for this small moment of peace. But she knew it wouldn't last long. The war was still out there, and the enemy would never stop searching for her. They had to stay vigilant, stay alert. But for tonight, in this small hidden cave, they were safe. The fire crackled softly, sending flickers of light across the cave's walls. The princess sat still, her back against the cool stone, her eyes watching the baby as he slept in her arms. Her thoughts drifted, wandering between exhaustion and the ever-present worry that they weren't safe enough. The wind outside howled against the mountain, and she could feel the chill creeping into her bones. Even in this hidden cave, the world beyond felt like it was closing in. The soldier, sitting near the entrance of the cave, kept his sharp eyes trained on the surroundings. His posture was relaxed, but there was no mistaking the way he listened for any sound that could betray them. Every now and then, his gaze would shift to the princess, a brief moment of quiet communication passing between them. He had already proven himself trustworthy, but still, the weight of the war pressed on her shoulders. She couldn't let her guard down completely, not while they were still vulnerable. They had been here for a few hours, and the journey had taken its toll on both of them. The princess's body ached from the long hours of walking, her legs stiff and sore from the climb through the mountain's rugged terrain. The soldier, too, looked tired, though he hid it well. He hadn't shown any sign of weakness, even after their grueling trek. He was a warrior, a soldier, forged in the fires of battle, and he wasn't one to complain. The baby shifted in her arms. She smiled softly as she adjusted him, pulling the blanket around him more securely. The baby had been quiet since they arrived at the cave, which was a relief. She couldn't help but wonder what the child's life would be like, what kind of world he would grow up in. Would he know peace? Would he ever know a time when the stars weren't filled with the sounds of battle? The soldier broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "We can't stay here for too long. The enemy will be looking for us, and if they find this place, it'll be over. We need to keep moving." The princess nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the baby. "I know," she replied. "But where can we go?" "The mountains are dangerous, and we're already so far from the palace. We head deeper into the mountains," he said. "There are places up ahead, old caves and abandoned outposts. They're hard to reach, and most people don't even know they exist. It's our best chance." The princess glanced at him, studying his face. The determination in his eyes hadn't wavered since the moment they met. It was strange, she thought, how much trust she had placed in him. Just days ago, she had feared humans had seen them as nothing more than warriors, merciless and destructive. But this human soldier had shown her that there was more to them than just violence. He had protected her, He had cared for her child. And now he was leading her through the mountains, offering what little hope there was left. "How far is it?" she asked. "Not far," he answered. "But the climb will be tough. We'll have to move quickly." She nodded, knowing that there was no other choice. The enemy would never give up. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. Her mind was already set on the next step, on what needed to be done to keep them safe. The soldier got to his feet, stretching his arms above his head before looking back at her. "We'll leave in an hour. Get some rest if you can. We'll need all the energy we can get." She didn't say anything, but she watched him as he turned back to the entrance. The cave was small, and the air was thick with tension. She knew. The soldier was right. They couldn't afford to stay here for long. But the thought of leaving, of stepping back into the cold wilderness, sent a knot of fear tightening in her chest. Every decision she made, every step she took, felt like it was leading them closer to danger. She looked down at her baby again, who stirred lightly in her arms. She had to protect him no matter what. That was the only thing that mattered now. Her people, her empire, everything had been lost. But she still had her child, and she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. She felt the soldier's eyes on her again, and when she looked up, he gave her a small nod, almost as if he could read her thoughts. He didn't say anything, but she knew that he understood. He was in this with her. For whatever reason, he had chosen to help. He had chosen to stand by her, and that was something she would never forget. The hour passed quickly, and soon they were on their feet again, gathering what little they had. The soldier checked his weapon once more, ensuring that everything was in order. The princess wrapped the baby carefully in the blanket, adjusting him so that she could carry him securely. The cold air outside had already begun to seep into the cave, and she knew that the longer they stayed, the more dangerous it would become. They didn't speak as they left the cave, slipping out into the dark mountain night. The stars above were hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind howled through the narrow passes, carrying with it the scent of snow. The ground beneath them was rocky and uneven, forcing them to move slowly. The soldier led the way, always scanning the path ahead, his every step sure and confident. The princess followed closely behind, her heart racing as she tried to keep up with his pace. The baby was sleeping again, but every bump in the ground made her hold him closer. She couldn't afford to lose him. She couldn't afford to fail now. As they climbed higher, the temperature dropped even more. The wind whipped at their faces, cutting through their clothes, but they didn't stop. There was no time to stop. The soldier moved with purpose, taking calculated steps, guiding them through the dark, winding paths. Every now and then, he would glance back to make sure she was still following. And every time he did, she gave him a small nod. The higher they climbed, the more dangerous the terrain became. The rocks were loose, and the paths narrow. The princess stumbled once, catching herself on a jagged rock before she fell. The soldier was immediately at her side, steadying her with one hand. "You all right?" he asked, his voice calm. She nodded, feeling the sting of her scraped hands. "I'm fine, just tired." He didn't say anything more, just helped her too. Her feet and motioned for her to keep going. The mountains were unforgiving, but they had no choice but to push on. The princess could see it in his eyes. The soldier was used to this kind of struggle. He was used to the hardships of survival. But for her, every step felt like a battle, each one draining more of her strength. They pressed on for what felt like hours, the air growing colder with each step. The only sound was the crunch of their footsteps on the frozen ground and the wind that howled through the mountain passes. The princess had stopped trying to keep track of time. There was no point. All that mattered was reaching safety. Finally, they reached a small ledge where the soldier motioned for them to stop. He turned to her, his face serious. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low. "Stay close. There's a small outpost. Just ahead. We'll rest there." The princess didn't speak, simply nodded, her eyes scanning the dark landscape. She didn't know what awaited them ahead, but she trusted the soldier. And for now, that was enough. They moved forward again. Their steps slow but steady. The ledge grew narrower, the rocks sharper, but the soldier moved like he had walked this path 1,000 times before. He was calm, unshaken by the dangers surrounding them. She admired that about him, his ability to stay composed in the face of everything they had been through. As they reached the end of the ledge, the soldier held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He crouched down, his eyes scanning the area ahead. The princess followed suit, crouching low to the ground, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment everything was still. The wind howled around them, but there were no signs of movement. No signs of the enemy. The soldier's sharp eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, waiting for any sign of danger. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "All clear," he whispered. The princess exhaled in relief, though the tension in her body didn't leave. They moved forward once more, the soldier leading the way. The path before them was dark, and she couldn't see what lay ahead, but she followed without question. She had no other choice. They were on the edge of something new, something uncertain. But they were still alive, still fighting. And as long as they kept moving, there was hope.